how we ended up here. It was New Year's Eve, and Dan arrived at his parents' house for the annual celebration, accompanied by his wife Nancy and their 2 children, Jason and Judy. His younger brother, Brian, was also there with his wife, April, and their kids, Todd and Cameron. The evening had barely begun when Brian dropped a bombshell. He had been having an affair with Nancy. Stunned, Dan confronted his mother, hoping for support. To his shock, she sided with Brian and promptly gathered the family for a meeting. What followed was a series of crushing revelations that left Dan reeling. Instead of outrage, the family cheered for Brian and Nancy's relationship. Jason admitted he might not even be Dan's biological son, while Judy expressed a belief that her mother was nothing more than a disgrace. Each revelation, Dan was told, stemmed from sarcastic remarks he had made in the past, jokes he never imagined would be taken so seriously. Unable to process how everything had unraveled so quickly, Dan withdrew from the gathering, stepping outside to sit alone in the darkness. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on him as he wondered how his life had come to this. Nancy soon followed, finding him on the back porch. "You look upset," she said, her tone almost amused, then exhaled sharply. "Why wouldn't I be?" He turned to her, his voice tight with anger. "I just heard some of the most vicious things imaginable, and the people I love seem perfectly fine with it." Nancy's lips curled slightly. Her eyes carried a familiar glint, one he hadn't seen in years. She reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Dan, you're not actually taking all of that seriously, are you?" He fought the growing rage inside him, forcing himself to stay calm. Maybe, just maybe, she had an explanation that made sense. At least he hoped so. "Your sister, Jennifer, is pregnant," Nancy said matter-of-factly. "Before long, we'll be grandparents, too. I'd hate for our grandkids to be confused about how to treat what I know will be a loving grandfather." Her tone was condescending, as if she were speaking to a child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. Dan clenched his fists at his sides. There was something he needed to clarify. When this story first came out, people were quick to judge him. The feedback had been harsh. Many called him an awful person for the way he treated his mother and children. The truth was, he never realized the impact his words had. After that night, he did his best to make amends. But he wasn't a villain. He wasn't a cruel man, just someone who never quite fit in. Social interactions had always been a struggle. It was like being colorblind in an art museum. He could see the paintings but never understand why others admired them. Brian, on the other hand, was the center of attention, the one everyone gravitated toward. No matter how hard Dan tried, he could never bridge the gap between them. Jokes were his way of connecting, but somehow they always fell flat when he told them. Moments later, someone else would repeat the same joke, and suddenly it was hilarious. He never understood why. Nancy knew all this about him. She had married him despite his awkwardness. And yet, as much as he struggled in social settings, he wasn't an idiot, which brought him back to the present, back to Nancy, sitting beside him on the porch, acting as if this whole thing was nothing more than a misunderstanding. Dan let out a slow breath. "I get it, Nancy. Jennifer wants me to stop making jokes she doesn't like, and now I've realized that no one else does either. I'll apologize when I go back inside." He stared into the night, but his thoughts only grew darker. His gaze shifted to Nancy's face. Her eyes still held that infuriatingly knowing expression, but his own grew colder. "I understand what you said," he continued, his voice low, "but here's what I don't understand." He turned fully toward her now. "If the people who claimed to love me had a problem with my jokes, why didn't they just talk to me? Why didn't you?" Nancy remained silent. "When my mother said she supported me and called that meeting, it wasn't to help me. It was a setup, a trap." His voice hardened. "Even my kids knew what was happening. They knew you all were waiting to ambush me. Supposedly, I hurt you two." He scoffed. "So what was it, Nancy? Payback?" His jaw tightened. "They're my children. I'll always love them. They're young. They make mistakes. But you don't make mistakes, do you, Nancy?" She shifted uncomfortably, reaching for his arm as if to quiet him. He ignored her and pressed on. "As I understand it, Jennifer called you, asked you to get me to ease up on her. You had a choice." His eyes narrowed. You could have come to me directly, told me what she said. But where's the fun in that? A bitter smile flickered across his lips. Instead, you gathered everyone, turned them against me, and turned this whole thing into one big joke. Your joke. He leaned back against the chair, exhaling slowly. You pulled the strings, Nancy. And now he finally saw them. How the night truly ended. I saw your eyes when you stepped out here. The glow in Nancy's gaze betrayed her. Even if I had been blind, I would have recognized the truth. It was impossible to miss. You enjoyed tonight, didn't you? I asked, my voice steady but firm. Tell me, Nancy, did you all talk about me after I left? Did you laugh about how shattered I was? I sighed, shaking my head. I know I've made plenty of mistakes. I stumble all the time, but that's on me. I don't make excuses. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. But what about you, Nancy? Can you say the same? I let the silence stretch between us as I gathered my thoughts. I never imagined I'd be saying these things to her. I've always loved you, Nancy. She stiffened. Are you suggesting I don't love you? I watched her carefully. The way she listened, really listened, told me that, for the first time that evening, she realized this wasn't going the way she had planned. Her expression sharpened, and I knew she was about to call it quits. Time to steer her clueless husband back inside. Calm me down, put me in my place. No, Dan, I know you love me, she said smoothly, leaning in to kiss me. I pulled back. And do you trust me? I asked, have I ever given you a reason to doubt me? To question my honesty? Have I ever made you wonder if I was hiding something from you? You know I love you, and of course I trust you, Nancy replied, an edge of frustration creeping into her voice. But what's this about? What does any of this have to do with tonight? She exhaled sharply. Dan, it was just a joke. I held up a hand. Let me finish. For years, we had been a solid couple. We loved each other. We trusted each other. And I believed that love was still there. But tonight, I hesitated, then met her gaze. Tonight, I watched you choose not to stand by me. I saw you let me take every hit without stepping in. My voice dropped lower, and I saw how much you enjoyed it. Nancy's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. You have this place inside you, Nancy. I continued, my voice quieter now. A place where it's okay to let me suffer. Maybe you don't go there often, but maybe you do. More than I realize. I sat back, letting the words settle. We're not getting divorced, unless that's what you want. And yes, our love will continue, if you still love me. I smiled faintly. But trust, well, that took a hit tonight. Nancy's hands trembled slightly, maybe from cold, maybe from something else. We've been together for a long time, and that means something, I said. So let's put it this way. I still trust you mostly. I smirked. From now on, trust but verify. I pushed myself up from the chair. I'll work on being less a social mess, I added. And you can work on being better than mostly trustworthy. It's not what I wanted, I admitted, reaching for her hand to help her up, but it's the best we can do with what we have left. Nancy nodded stiffly. Let's go inside, I said. I imagine my family will be circling me like vultures, waiting to tear into me again. But hey, that's what the holidays are for, right? I gave her a small, unreadable smile. Put on a good face, Nancy. No one needs to know what happened out here tonight. I chuckled bitterly. I'd hate to ruin the kids' moods, especially when I'll be so busy apologizing. Nancy stepped inside with me, but she vanished almost immediately, pulling my mother into the kitchen. Brian clapped an arm around my shoulders, shaking me slightly. We really got you, didn't we? I forced a grin. You sure did, little brother. I let out a low chuckle. Yeah, you guys were too quick for me. Completely blindsided me. I met his gaze evenly. Each of you got your pound of flesh. I caught my mother watching me as she re-entered the room. She wrinkled her nose slightly at my words, as if suddenly uncomfortable. My father, noticing the exchange, walked over to her. They murmured something to each other, their expressions darkening. The party ended faster than I expected. By the time we got home, the house was quiet, the night pressing in around us. Nancy hesitated before reaching for me, as if seeking comfort. I turned away. If you're wondering how I managed to handle that conversation so well, it's simple. When you don't pick up on people's emotions, it's easy to be stepped on. And as I've learned, it's easier to cross the line than to stay within it. It's easier to come across as indifferent than to show how much it really hurts. I had just spent the evening apologizing, but if you ask my children, they'd tell you something important about me. In the days that followed, Nancy tried talk. She regretted how upset I still was. She wanted to fix things, to make me laugh again. It was just a joke, she kept saying, as if that made it better. How I moved on, or didn't. Not long after New Year's, the delayed Christmas presents I had ordered finally arrived. Everyone got one. Inside each elegant, beautifully wrapped box was a gleaming 1-pound brass kettlebell, engraved with the words, "A pound of flesh taken from Dan Martin, December 31st. As I passed through the kitchen, I saw Mary unwrapping hers. I didn't stick around to see her reaction. I don't retaliate, not because I'm particularly noble, but because I genuinely don't know how. Practical jokes always feel cruel to me. I never see the humor, never expect them, never recognize them until I'm already humiliated. And when it happens, I'm left scrambling off guard, embarrassed, and defensive again. So I handled things in my own way, though I doubt anyone found it amusing. I started paying close attention to bank statements and receipts. Nancy had always managed our finances. She wasn't thrilled when I suddenly took an interest. Something wrong. I'd ask whenever she caught me reviewing our checkbook. Anything you don't want me to see? She never answered, but I could see how much she wanted to scream. Of course, I had every right to look. I became meticulous, tracking small purchases, checking phone records, noting the mileage on her car. One evening, as I mapped out her recent shopping trips based on receipts, Nancy walked in. I looked up casually. "Just getting everything ready for tax season, honey." She exhaled sharply and walked away. Shortly before Valentine's Day, I had to work late. I called home to tell Nancy not to wait for me. I grabbed dinner near the office. Around 6:30 p.m., I stepped into a small restaurant across the street. It was a quiet place where I'd eaten lunch for years. And there, sitting in a booth, was Nancy. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat a well-dressed man, about my age. Clean-cut, polished, the kind of guy who probably never struggled to fit in. I strolled over. "Nancy, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" I said, my tone perfectly even. "I didn't realize you had a date tonight." Nancy turned bright red. "Really, Dan? This isn't a date. Dr. Ross is my therapist." I raised an eyebrow. "I've been seeing him since, well, you know," she continued, glancing at him. "He's been really helpful. He actually suggested you join us. Maybe he can help with, your anger." I almost laughed out loud. What planet did these people escape from? Then again, maybe I was looking at it the wrong way. Maybe they really believed they were helping me. Maybe even Dr. Ross meant well. But I wasn't about to sit there and be ambushed. "So let me get this straight," I said, leaning in. "You tell your therapist about our problems, and the two of you decide the best way to fix me is to trap me into an impromptu therapy session? And this is supposed to make me less angry at you for betraying me." Nancy flinched. I turned to Dr. Ross. "And what exactly is your role in this, Doc? You going to cure my so-called anger issues? Who diagnosed me? Because I don't recall ever agreeing to treatment." Dr. Ross paled. "Maybe I should call the state licensing board." I added, "See what they think about unsolicited psychiatric interventions." He looked like he wanted to disappear. I shifted my attention back to Nancy. "You really want to move past this?" I asked, my voice quieter but colder. "It's simple. Stop lying, to me and to yourself." I leaned in slightly. "You were happy to humiliate me. You had your fun. But now you need to own what you did." I let the silence stretch before continuing. "That weight I gave you, keep it on your desk. Look at it every day. And every time you do, remind yourself not to be so damn reckless again." Nancy's lips parted, but no words came out. You know what's funny? I mused. You've never actually apologized. Not once. I didn't wait for a response. I simply turned and walked out. Nancy sat frozen. Dr. Ross stared down at his phone, like it might open up and swallow him whole. Maybe Nancy would follow me. Maybe she wouldn't. That wasn't my call to make. But after everything, I knew two things for certain. I'd still put my foot in my mouth sometimes. I'd still have to apologize when I did. And Nancy? She'd never try a stunt like that again.